Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is Just Brian, and I'm your host, Brian Strawser. We left you hanging in the year 1800 in the previous show, so let's pick up with 1801. The life expectancy then, 37. Again, now that's not to say that people didn't live longer, but the average was that. And the last show, I didn't really stress why it was so low. You know, you had diseases. Like the common cold could kill a lot of people in one fell swoop. You had people that might get injured. You'd have we didn't have penicillin at the time. If you got an infection, you know, it was up to God's grace. More often than not, you were on your way. So. And, of course, the Revolutionary War and all that. If you notice, skirmish after skirmish after skirmish. It was hard living. I don't know. We're still thinking, is it really the good old days? So, 1803, that was when the Louisiana Purchase went through. We bought a piece of land starting down in New Orleans, and it kind of went up the Mississippi on the right side. Just picture you're looking at the map and it kind of goes up into Wisconsin. Now, on the west line or the left line, it starts kind of angling off slowly and gradually off to the left. It gets wider and wider like a big funnel. It encompasses most of the Midwest, and it finishes up at the Canadian border by Idaho. It doesn't go into Idaho, but it encompasses both South and North Dakota. Huge body of land. And we got it from Napoleon Bonaparte, our favorite little Frenchman from last show. We paid $11.25 million. In addition to that, they agreed to cancel $3.75 million in debt that was left over for the Revolutionary Army. So all in all, that wasn't a bad deal. And here's the thing. Napoleon kind of wanted to go back to North America because he just didn't like us. And that's the true fact. He hated Americans. They were uneducated. They were crass. They were the bottom of the barrel. But he had a little problem here. He was still at war with Great Britain, and he wasn't doing very well at times. So he needed money. So that's where all this cash went. It went right into his pockets, and then from there it went to fund his military, his land forces, and his navy. So now we got this big chunk of land, and I think that's where Lewis and Clark come in and all that experimenting or navigating and whatnot. Exploration. That was that 10-cent word I was looking for. I know it was E. So we got all this land. They survey it. Slowly but surely we start to fill it up. But we still have a problem with the British. They're still a thorn in our side. And let's move on to the year 1807 to 1809. There was a thing called the Embargo Act of 1807. That was a big word, too. Let's see. The Embargo Act against Great Britain and the French, by the way, during the Napoleon War was put in place because they would steal our ships, the British did. And like I said, the French weren't doing us any favors. They would steal our ships at sea. They would take our sailors and they would be conscribed forcefully to go into the British Navy. They had to fight against their own brothers. Wasn't cool. So we did this embargo thing, first one we'd ever done. And it was a little hard. We got most of our stuff from Europe. But there was a little thing called the Industrial Revolution over in Europe, mostly Great Britain. I mean, they're the ones that started it. It was slowly filtering over here to America. And while this was a hardship, this embargo, because we didn't get things that were made by the British, and they were great at manufacturing things, lots of precision work on machinery and tools. And they also shipped over food products and things like that. So we got nothing from Great Britain for a 2-year period. But what that did do is it spurred the development of our Industrial Revolution. And it started this machine that just kept chugging, and it started to build. And that's going to come up here about 20 years down the road. Well, 15 in this episode. But think about it. We did not have an infrastructure until this happened. We didn't make anything. We didn't build anything. It's like the America of the 1980s to present. We don't make anything. You know, if China quit sending stuff to us, we'd be foobarred. But ask an army buddy. He'll tell you what that means. But back to the 1800s. So we start building things up. And this turns out to be a good thing. So we'll move to 1808. Slave trade ended. That doesn't mean that slave ownership ended. It means that legally slave trade officially ended. And I also have to make it very clear that there was still black market slave trade. It didn't stop completely, but the prohibition officially of importing new slaves from Africa ended in 1808. That meant for the people who owned slaves here that they had to rely on the generational system to cheat these people out of a free life. How many generations were born and died? Well, again, that was a rather ugly part of our history. So we'll move on to 1812. And the War of 1812. Those wonderful British, here they come again. There was a bit years ago by Tommy and Dickie Smothers. This will tell you, how old I am, I guess. And actually, I was a little kid when I listened to these records. They were all on vinyl because, 8-tracks weren't even around. And some of you are saying, what's an 8-track? Ask your grandpa, he'll tell you.
Google it.
Or Google it. Yeah, Google the 8-track. That is a paradox right there. Look that up too. I don't have time to explain it to you. So, here we are. Damn British. Bad teeth, obnoxious soccer fans. British. So, we've had small skirmishes with the British. They never totally went away. They're kind of like, they're like bad Chinese food. It just keeps coming back. It gets you over and over. Well, these skirmishes, they would build up, and they got more and more. And again, they still kept confiscating our ships at sea and imprisoning our sailors. They were forced by conscription into their navy. And finally, things popped. They came and they attacked not just us, but they attacked Canada too. That's not talked about a lot. The Canadians and us, we fought together against the British. And it kind of built up to a head. It stopped in 1815. But there was a little skirmish with the Canadians up there in the north and the British. And they tried to conquer the city of Montreal. Well, it failed. And at that point, the Canadians had the upper hand. And they beat back the British. So they had lost in the north. Down in the south, down in Louisiana, they tried to attack us. sent their ships in, and still at the time, the British had the greatest naval force on the planet. So they dumped all their militia and their weapons and everything, and we beat them back in New Orleans. So they had lost. Thank God, no more British. They signed they called it the Treaty of Ghent. Yeah, well, something like that. Ghent. My handwriting's terrible. Ghent, 1815, and that was finally the end of scraps with the British. So let's move on to 1820. We have a thing called the Missouri Compromise. And I suppose I should have known more about this. I kind of did. I kind of felt bad. Like I should have paid attention in school at some point. What this was a compromise in Congress. We had two states that wanted, or two territories that wanted to become states, Maine and Missouri. Maine, obviously, was a free state, no slavery. Missouri, however, was a territory that had slavery and they wanted to keep it. So they made this deal called the Missouri Compromise. They both came in 1820, and they both got to keep their way. Now, there's a little thing called the 3/5 rule, and it has caused quite a kerfuffle here in the past 5 to 7 years. What the 3/5 rule is that the southern states wanted to count each slave when they did their surveys. Oh my God, you know what I mean. They count everybody. Census. What's wrong with me? I was going to, yeah. Anyways, so we didn't want that, because if they got to count all their slaves, that meant that we would never get anything through Congress on the favor of the North side or the free side. So there was a compromise made. It was called the 3/5 rule, and each slave counted as 3/5 of a person. That kept it just about dead even in Congress when they were voting on things. The problem now is that you will have certain groups, I don't think we need to go into too much detail, that will take this 3/5 rule and say, look, even back then, they were prejudiced against black people. Actually, if you think about it, we were trying to help the situation. We were trying to hold back that southern tide. Because if they'd have had that, they would have had the vote. Slavery might still be around to this day. It wasn't a slight. Nobody hated black people in the North. They were just trying to even the playing field. So when you hear this brought up now and they say white people had the 3/5 rule, they were prejudiced even then, that's not what it was. They're taking it completely out of context, and don't allow them to do that in an argument or a discussion, hopefully. We don't want to argue too much. It's tiring. Just tell them, no, here's what it is. And if they want to argue more at that point, just walk away. There's one thing I learned. You can argue with a fool, but the fool never gets any smarter. So,
even a fool's considered wise when he keeps his mouth shut.
Well, yeah. Yeah. So just smile, say okay, and walk away. So, let's see. Here in 1820, this is right where the U.S. Industrial Revolution really hit its stride. From 18 to 40, it just engulfed the whole nation, and at like a factor of 10. It was amazing how big this was. And we no longer needed Western Europe. We started to come into a time period where they were starting to need our goods, and they didn't like it. Here's something that you have to think about, though, during this Industrial Revolution. Yeah, we had all kinds of new products. We had our own clothing, tools for farming and weaponry and all these amazing new things. But who built it? During this time, you had children running around, for instance, in the textile mills in the state of Massachusetts, where you can still see remnants of the industries there. They were lining the rivers because they used the water as power. They did the same thing down in the Carolinas. There was a huge textile industry that no longer exists. Well, they had children running around and helping to feed the machines with the fabric and maintain these things. Women worked there. There were men too, but they used people that they didn't have to pay much to. How many children died on those floors? I mean, you just cringe at the thought of it today. You always hear about child labor over in the East. Well, it happened here, folks. It happened here first. Well, second. First it happened in Great Britain, then it happened here. Another one of those things that they usually don't want to talk about, but it happened. So that definitely contributed to the death rate, or the lack of old age, if you will. You had also in the 20s, the first labor unions started springing up. And I'm going to say something that I really don't like saying right now, because most people that know me know I am not a huge fan of unions. But in that time frame, they were definitely needed. You needed some kind of representation because the workers had none. None. It was an ugly time. And you had strikes. You had people die in those strikes because they would hire militia, the owners of these plants, and they'd try to force people back to work or force them off the property so they could bring in people that wouldn't work through the union. It was an ugly process, but it needed to happen. So it did, and at that point in time in our nation, it was a great thing. Kind of chokes me to say that, but there it is. It's true. In 1823, there was a little thing called the Monroe Doctrine. There were South America was developing at the time, so was Central America. And you had all these Latin American countries. They were trying to come into their own. We knew if we didn't do something to protect them, and by extension, our own rights and our freedoms, you would have a lot of the same old players come back from Great Britain, from France, from Spain, from Portugal to try to filter their way back into these countries and gain a foothold and not just hurt those people, but by extension hurt us. So we passed the Monroe Doctrine, and that was a way of protecting these Latin American countries from those people that would come and take advantage of them. Didn't always work, but for the most part, it was better than nothing. And later on in life, we all remember what they call banana republics, where you'd have a military dictator take over, and then it was just controlled chaos at times. But nothing's perfect. Absolutely nothing is perfect. And anybody that tells you that they can guarantee you this perfect utopian world is either a fool or a liar or a real ugly combination. My advice to you would be to go back through history and look at some of these things yourselves and see where they promised you the moon and stars and they didn't even deliver dirt. It's just, to this day, it plays out, but I digress. And I promise you that in the future 25-year periods, it's really going to pick up. And in my research, I saw that it just 1851 to 1875 alone might become 2 shows, maybe 3. It was incredible what happened in our history that I had forgotten. But for now, I would say that that is enough of history. So go have some tea and crumpets and think of the British, or I don't know, have some French fries.
But don't call them French fries. Call them
American fries.
or chips.
Oh, that's right. British chips, fish and chips. You know what? I like fish and chips, though. And you know what? I like haggis. I don't know why I like haggis. I shouldn't like it. It smells bad. It's made out of spare parts, but I like it. But then again, maybe that's the Scottish. So screw the British.
Give us a crazy trucker story to close things out.
Oh, crazy trucker story. Well, I'll give you one. It happened in Little Rock, Arkansas. Well, it started in Little Rock, Arkansas, and it ended in Memphis, Tennessee. It was a summer night, and it was kind of balmy, and it had gotten darker than it should have. I mean, it was getting dark, but I mean, it just went like pitch black, like somebody had taken away all the stars and the moon and everything. And I pulled up to the booth that every JB Hunt yard had. And this girl stuck her head out the booth and she said, "You need to park that truck, honey." And I said, "Why?" "Well, there's a tornado coming. There's a tornado." And I said, "I don't see any tornado." She said, "Well, that's the problem. You never see them till you do." And I said, "I don't know what you mean, but I need to go. I have a load to deliver in Memphis in the morning." She said, "Well, we're going inside, so if it comes through, we can go down into a cellar they have in the bottom of the basement. Protect ourselves. If you see a tornado, you just better get off the road and get in the ditch." And I said, all right, I'll do that. I'm thinking, yeah, whatever. So I pull out of the yard and I get on Interstate 40 and I'm going east. And it's probably, like I said, it's the summer. It's probably 8 o'clock, so there should have been a little light. There was nothing at all. And it was just like the heavens had just compressed down on us. I mean, the air was heavy. Well, I turned the CB on because I thought, well, maybe I should listen just in case anything happened. And it was like an explosion. And they said, "Yeah, to the left and on to the right." And all of a sudden, this guy says, "JB Hunt," because they didn't ever call us anything but that. And I looked around, and I was the only one on the highway. And I said, "You talking to me?" He said, "Are you the one driving east?" I said, "Yep." He said, "I'm talking to you." He said, "You need to get off the highway." And I said, "Why would I do that?" He said, "Because there's a tornado following you." And I looked off to the left, and I'd say about a mile to my left, there were 2 tornadoes that were pacing me. I was going about maybe 60 miles an hour. The truck would only do 62. They had done what they call governing the throttle so that you'd just go so fast. Well, I'll tell you what, I was standing on that throttle pedal. And I'm thinking, man, let's keep going. And I'm thinking, what am I going to do? If that thing comes at me, do I wreck the truck? And I'm like, no. And what do I do? So I just said, I'm just going to run it. We'll see what it does. I don't know. Maybe I'll be a statistic at the end of the night. But I just kept hammering it. Well, one of those tornadoes flipped off to the northeast, and then it just dissipated. And then the other one dissipated. I'm still standing on that throttle pedal. I'm thinking, maybe I can relax now. But I'm thinking, maybe I can't. So I just keep going. And I get over to West Memphis, Arkansas. There was this truck stop there. It was a 76 at the time. They were in the process of doing away with 76 truck stops at the time. They're all TAs, or they just don't exist at all. I whipped in there, and my legs were still just shaking, when you get adrenaline, you get just that tapping. So I go in there, and I thought, maybe I'll get some milk. That'll calm me down. So I went in there, and all of a sudden the power goes out. I couldn't even buy the milk. And they said, everybody get cover. And I said, yeah, forget that. I went out and got in the truck, and I got back out on the highway, and I went across the river, and I went on the down to the south side of Memphis. I was delivering over on the southeast side. There's an industrial area there. Memphis was black. The power was completely out. It was all blacked out. The only lights were headlights, and that was it. So I go down and I take the southern bypass around Memphis, and I get over and I slow way down because I have no choice, and I get off the highway at the exit I was supposed to. I find this place. I park, and I get out, and I start walking around, and I'm thinking, if I have to, where could I hide? And I realized there was no place to hide. I had got myself into a bad situation. So, logic being what it was, I thought, if that tornado picks this truck up or flips it, what's going to happen? I'm going to go flying. So I sat there. I put my seatbelt on. I locked the doors, and I just let the engine run in because it was hot. So I had air conditioning at least. I fell asleep sitting up in that chair. Next thing I know, it's about 7:30 in the morning, and this guy's knocking on my door. I'm still sitting in that chair with the seatbelt on. It was cinched up tight and everything. He said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I was sleeping." He said, "Don't you know there was tornadoes last night?" And I said, "Yeah, I heard rumors." And he said, "Did you sleep like that?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I'll get you doors open, back in door so-and-so." And he did. He said, "Come on in. You get some coffee or something." My legs were so cramped up, and it just hurt to move them. It'd take forever to get out of that truck. But I'll never forget that. It was the day I outran 2 tornadoes. I don't ever want to do that again. I tell you, they are, and those were not big tornadoes, but they were big enough to scare the snot out of me. I have a lot of respect for people that live in Oklahoma and refuse to move. God bless you. You can have Oklahoma anyways. It's too hot. It's dry. But you know what? That's enough craziness for one show. When I reach you the next time, we should be around 1826, and we'll see what happened then. Have a wonderful time, wonderful evening. This is Brian Strawser, and you've been listening to Just Brian.